According to a report which was recently published by the Justice Department's Bureau of Justice Statistics, the number of sexual assaults that are being reported against prison inmates within the American prison system is going up steadily, and nearly half of them are committed by correctional officers themselves. Prison administrators report 8,763 cases in 2011. That's up 4% from the year before and up 11% from 2009. The study surveyed federal and state prisons, both private and local, as well as military, including over 1.97 million inmates in total. The Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003, when it was passed in Congress, called for these types of records to be kept and published each year. 10% of the reported cases in 2011 were substantiated based on investigation, meaning they were proven definitively to have actually happened, to be true. So 90% were reported but not substantiated, but the records don't clarify as to whether these cases were actually investigated before they were dismissed or not. 49% of the substantiated claims involved prison staff members. Of those substantiated staff on inmate cases in 2011, 54% of those were committed by women to female inmates. Although it's noteworthy to say that most of these cases seem to involve relationships that, quote, appear to be willing. However, given the authority status that staff members are in, it is still highly illegal and a definite no-no to get involved in that sort of situation. 3/4 of guilty staff members approximately quit or were fired, while only 45% were arrested or prosecuted in any way. The report also notes that female inmates suffer a disproportionate amount of sexual assault within the prison system, while women only make up for about 7% of all total state and federal inmates. They make up 33% of staff on inmate sexual assaults and 22% of inmate on inmate sexual assaults. Of course, the study itself does note, however, that the increased number of cases could be partially due to the fact that there has been an increased rate of reporting these cases and an increased rate of awareness within the prison community, and in an attempt to bring these kinds of problems to light. So, what are your guys' views on this situation?
Yeah, let me. This is just shameful. If you want to ask for my view on the situation, like one more example of America as a prison culture that's just completely gone wrong and serves no one, whether that's the public or the prisoners, who are still citizens, by the way, and do still have some rights.
So I actually didn't like the way this article was written that well, because it conflates two different things that are both bad and shouldn't happen, but one is way worse than the other. And there's the staffers abusing the prisoners sexually, and then there's the willing relationships, which are bad, but I don't think they're at the scale of like a guard raping an inmate or something like that. Like, we heard the story a while ago about the one male inmate who knocked up 3 female guards in the same prison. Like, that's bad and you should be fired, but I don't conflate that situation with, a guard allowing another inmate to assault an inmate or a guard assaulting an inmate in a sexual way or a non-sexual way or whatever. But we're talking about sexual assault. So, like, to me, like, the women being disproportionately victimized by staff makes all the sense in the world. Anytime you have a situation where women are in a situation where they're completely controlled by males or people in general, like, bad things are going to happen. We see that in the military to some extent. So to a large extent. So it's no surprise to me that in a prison setting that the same thing occurs. Men being sexually assaulted and assaulted by male guards, also not surprising. The only thing I wish is that it gave a bigger distinction in the numbers between the willing encounters and the non-willing encounters, because I think that's important.
I understand what you mean. It's like the difference between statutory rape when it's like a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old, and the difference between, a violent assault rape. There was a story about that prison in Alabama, where the Department of Justice turned their backs as women were raped and forced to perform sexual favors in order to get clean clothes, in order to get food, in order to evade punishment. Inmates were sodomized and violently raped and inflicted with physical and mental tortures.
Willing relationships should get you fired, right? Like, you can't have that. And heavily investigated to see if you're doing special favors for that inmate, right? But rape should obviously get you in a jail cell. Like, that's the reason I'm trying to draw that distinction. But it's a total disaster, and like, we see this in our I believe the study was for adult prisons, but we see this a lot in our juvenile prisons. Like, if you give, like, I'm gonna generalize and say guys, even though a lot of women guards are abusers too. But if you give guys or adults control over other human beings, they're going to abuse them to some extent. So you have to have a system where they can report it better and where they can be investigated. And I cannot believe that out of 9 out of 10 of them were not provable or were not, like, true. So they got to fix that number, that 90% of them weren't proven. Like, that's ridiculous. So you got to put in a system where they can report it and it will go somewhere outside the prison guard structure. And you just got to I don't know how exactly you deal with this in a larger extent, because it's a huge problem. We can't stop the inmates from raping other inmates, like, and now we have to worry about the guards. So, like, it's just a disaster. But you need a system where they don't have to report through the prison system, the prison hierarchy.
I actually pulled up the studies and I have the stats that I broke it down based on what type of prison they were, what type of sexual allegations there were, and who they were perpetrated by. One of my big crusades is the whole private prison system, but I like to also challenge myself and, think that I have data behind my crusades. So let's compare these prison rape statistics, with public prisons and private prisons. So federal prisons, which have a population of almost 1.4 million people, there were so here's your non-violent, your more consensual stats. Non-consensual sex, not or sexual misconduct. So this is either inmates who were not physically raped but forced into situations they didn't want to be in, or staff and inmate relationships that weren't necessarily, like, again, they're not being forced into it. Inmate on inmate 2002, staff on inmate one was 1992. I don't have the resolution stats on that. Local jails, not prisons. Inmate on inmate, so this is non-consensual sex, 615. Sexual misconduct with staff on inmate, 390. I do have the resolution stats on this. Private prisons, 110 inmate on inmate. 6 of them were resolved, which seems like a pretty low percentage to me, but I don't have the other numbers to compare that to. I didn't collect that. I'm sorry. Staff on inmate relationships, 151 with 19 being resolved and action taken. So obviously you've got numbers there. Private prisons have the lowest number, but they also have the lowest population. What I do have some percentage differences on is the violent rape stats. So this is either abusive sexual contact from inmates or sexual harassment from staff. Local prisons, which again have a bigger population, local jails, I should say, you've got abusive assault from prisoners at 244 with 21 of them resolved. That's 11% ratio. Contrast that with private prisons. You've got 84 and 16 which is a 5.25% resolution. So you've got a much smaller resolution rate in private institutions than you do in public ones, at least in that particular statistic. The same with, however, it's not necessarily true though whenever it comes to staff on prison sexual or staff on inmate sexual harassment. In local jails, you've got 98 cases filed, 19 resolved for a 19% resolution rate. Staff on inmate sexual harassment claims, staff on inmate and jails, you've got 98 and 19 for 19%. Staff on inmate in private prisons, you've got 66 and 15. So that's 19% versus 22%. So when it comes to holding staff accountable, it looks like private prisons actually do a better job than public prisons do. But when it comes to holding inmates accountable, private prisons far and away don't do as well as public prisons. So I don't know if there's anything you can really extrapolate from that, or if that's just coincidence. And this is just for 2011. This isn't for all the years in the study. But there's at least in this data, I take away no clear advantage of, in the argument of private versus public for prisons.
I mean, the private prisons, I think they're more like they're more afraid of a lawsuit, and also they might have less reporting. Like they could be lying more, so like those stats couldn't be great. And I want to be a little fair to the prisons because we're saying 90% of them they don't investigate or whatever. Like these are prisoners, so I don't mean that in like they're not people, but you gotta factor in that there probably is a decent amount of false allegations, but to me, 90% of them being false is just way too high. Like I don't buy that. If it was 40% were false, and you gotta remember there's sexual harassment and sexual assault in there, which again is you're mixing murder and being punched in the face there. Like it's not the same thing. They don't I understand that the statistics aren't going to be 100% of these were true and 100% of these were solved, but it just seems horrible that it's 90% are not, don't result in any punishment or any resolution.
Right. I agree. That's way too high of a percentage for me to buy as well. The idea that 90% of them are made up or, no, I don't buy that. I can buy that, maybe they were hard to prove. But that's it. So Jeff, what do you think?
Oh, I was just going to add in that, yeah, the 90%, ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. My guess is they probably didn't look into it all that much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that they probably tried to make as little out of it, out of most of these cases as possible in order to sweep them under the rug.
And I don't want to underestimate how much the sexual harassment being mixed in could skew the results, because in my opinion, if there were sexual harassment claims by inmates against guards, then maybe 0% of them would be followed up on by the prison staff, because sexual harassment could be words or all that. So that's another thing that it just bothers me, because if the rapes and all that were being investigated were being resolved at 50-60%, they proved them and they got that out of there. But there's so many more reports of this guard called me a faggot, and excuse my language, or this guard called me that. That's why I don't want those mixed together, because it's technically could be sexual harassment and it could really negatively impact what we're interpreting from the data. So I just want I want that to be more separated. But
right, absolutely.
But Jordan gave the numbers that a lot of the physical assaults, it's 19 out of 51 or out of 151. So the numbers don't look good when you break them down. I'm just saying overall, if you're trying to make the article more impactful, you should write it smarter.
There are two different studies that the article kind of draws from, and both of them, to the article's credit, it does link to. One from the Justice Department's Bureau of Justice Statistics, and another one from, just as a study from May. But they are both linked to. The numbers I gave you are from the first one, which was published in January or published this month.